You may have noticed that the teaching today is being interwoven with stories. I really believe that stories teach us. And as I prayed and prepared for today, I knew the Lord was asking me to share a bit of our daughter's story as well as my own. And I got to be honest, there are a lot of things I would rather talk about. But it was one of those, the Lord's asking me to share this. So here it goes. So many of you know that our daughter Jennifer is Black. We might have a picture of her. It's her birthday today. It's her 31st birthday. Yeah. Jennifer is an amazing woman. She currently works as an executive coordinator for Volunteers of America in their Minneapolis office. She owns her own home. She is highly involved with her church, and most importantly, she loves the Lord. She grew up in Ghana, Africa, being tossed around from family to family there. She came to the U.S. when she was 13 and was tossed around here. As far as we can figure, we were her 12th family. She started coming to our church when she was 14, soon after she arrived in the U.S. She is a survivor in every sense of the word. She perseveres no matter what. She's one of the hardest workers I know. And how she came to be with us is a story for another day. But just let me say, Jennifer continues to amaze me. English is her third language, yet she graduated from Bethel University with a bachelor's degree in international relations in 4 years. The summer before her senior year, she was chosen for a coveted internship at the U.S. Embassy in London. Can you tell I'm proud? But 3.5 years ago, Jennifer was fired from a job. Even though she immediately found another job, I could tell that being fired was taking its toll on her self-esteem. So I thought that perhaps with English being her third language, she had misunderstood what she was supposed to be doing, or maybe she had misread office politics. Her boss had gotten fired just a couple of months before she had, or maybe she'd missed some cultural cues that I could help with, or maybe some shift in corporate culture due to a new person at the top. So I asked her if she'd like me to help her figure out why she might have been fired, and she was eager to learn. So we sat down one day at our kitchen table, and I began to ask her all kinds of questions about her work. And her answers weren't what I had expected. I'd entered the conversation thinking that it would be easy to help Jen understand, but the more we talked, the more perplexed I became. Finally, and I believe it was a leading from the Lord, Jen mentioned someone else who'd been fired. And the name of the other person who'd been fired, it didn't sound Anglo. And I knew the boss who'd gotten fired before Jen was from Mexico. And so I asked who'd been fired in the past few months since new leadership had come to the top. 4 people, 3 Hispanics, and our Black daughter. And so I asked Jen this question, Jen, how many minorities work at the company? And she said, oh, there's a lot of people from Taipei because we have a factory there. And I said, okay, skip the people from Taipei. How many other minorities work there? And she said, oh, there's a lot of Hispanics because they work in the warehouse. I said, not the warehouse. I'm talking about corporate headquarters. How many people work at corporate headquarters? And she said, about 100. And I said, okay, out of that 100, how many people are not minorities from Taipei? How many people are Black, Hispanic, Indian, Pakistani? I was trying to come up with any other color differentiation I could think of other than white. And Jen got quiet. And she thought and thought and thought. And finally she said, well, there's one African-American woman in accounting, but no one knows she's African-American because of her light skin. That's it? Yeah, that's it. So Jen, what you're telling me is that in the past few months, all of the known non-white people who are not needed for language translation in Taipei, all of them were fired. Jen's eyes got real big as the reality of what we had just discovered washed over her. And so I leaned and I said, Jen, your being fired is not your fault. Don't carry the weight of this. Leave the company behind and move into your next job knowing you did nothing wrong. And so Jen walked away from the table relieved. Yes, she was weighed down by the reality of racism, but knowing that she hadn't done anything wrong was a gift to her. But me? Yeah, I left the table with a weight in the pit of my stomach, right? First, it was a weight for Jen. The mama bear in me wanted to march down to that company and give them a piece of my mind, right? But I knew with certainty that if I went there, confronting them over their racism, they wouldn't get it. And the reason I knew they wouldn't get it was I am certain that it never crossed anyone's mind that they were firing all the minorities. And the reason I'm certain of that is that if it had crossed their mind, I'm confident someone would have said, we can't do that because we could get sued. So Jen was the last of the 4 to be fired, and clearly what they were doing hadn't crossed their minds. My guess is they said, oh, these people don't fit our corporate culture. They didn't see it. But then I began to wonder, how often do I, as a white person, not see the racism around me? Oh, Lord, give me eyes to see and ears to hear and a heart to understand what my non-white brothers and sisters face on a regular basis. I also began to wonder how often in my life I, as a woman in ministry, have carried a weight thinking I'd done something wrong when it really wasn't mine to carry, but it instead was a reflection of the sexism of someone else. Now, let me give you just one example. You've known me as your superintendent for 2.5 years. And I'm guessing by now that most of you would affirm that I have both leadership and preaching gifts. Let me tell you things I have heard during my years of ministry from ministry peers, other pastors, as well as overseers, and this is both inside the denomination and out. These are some of the things. Pam, your gifts are more behind the scenes administration than leadership. Pam, you have more of a teaching gift than a preaching gift. Why don't you teach one of our elective classes, maybe one just for women? Pam, maybe your leadership gifts would be better used in the business world. Pam, as a woman, you need to tone down your leadership because you might leave the men feeling emasculated. I'm not making that up. Pam, and this was from a superintendent, Pam, your pastoring and leadership gifts are really most suited to a small church with less than 40 people in it. Pam, I have nowhere to place you. Pam, I can't mentor you because what would people think? A side note here, I have had a handful of wonderful mentors, all male, because I didn't know where to find a woman mentor. But a side note here, mentor in groups, mentor in coffee shops, mentor in places where others can both observe and interrupt you. We'll be talking more about this at the Church Together gathering at New Hope on November 10th, if you want to wrestle with that one more. Something else I've heard multiple times. Pam, have you considered that you might be called to children's ministry? Now, I hope you're laughing because you know that's not me. A shout out to all of those of you who minister with kids. Bless you, and may your tribe increase. But for me, a room full of kindergartners scares me to death. I would much rather deal with you all than kindergartners. If you want to scare me for Halloween, dress up as kindergartners, honest. A couple more things that have been said to me by peers. This one often. Oh, we'd really like you on this committee because we need a woman. Not because we need your gifts or your skills or your input. We need a woman. Finally, when I was requested funds for a program that I was spearheading, a pastor who was on the committee that decided where the conference funds went told me, Pam, I don't think as a woman you're capable of doing this. And I told the rest of the committee that, but I'm sure God has something else for you. Now, you'd think I'd be able to brush these things off, right? But because I've heard these kinds of things over and over, I have spent way too much of my life asking things like, am I incapable of this because I'm a woman? You've heard me say I continue to be surprised as a superintendent, that I'm a superintendent. This is why. I've wrestled with, am I wrong on what my gifts are? Do I overestimate my capabilities? And yes, I've even wrestled, not recently, but with the thought, even though I'm not good with kids, should I be in children's ministry? The children would vote no. I know that. I carried weight that wasn't mine to carry. just as Jen was carrying weight that was not hers to carry. So why am I telling you this? It goes back to what I talked about at the start of this morning. The reason God gives us power is so that we can serve and empower others. And those isms, racism and sexism, they don't empower. They put people in bondage. They weigh people down. But often we don't see it. I told this story at mine a couple of years ago, but I'll tell it again. I was chairing a regional MEG board in my last conference. The MEG board, for those of you who don't know, the MEG board guides people through the ordination process. And on this particular day, we'd interviewed two people, one man, one woman. And after we'd interviewed them, we'd come up with what we wanted each of them to do in order to be ordained. I had a 2-hour drive home, and I was more than halfway home when it dawned on me. The woman we had interviewed came in with far more education and experience than the man. But we'd actually concluded that the woman had more to do before she could be ordained. Why? The only reason I could come up with is that we were harder on her simply because she was a woman, and that was with me chairing the committee. Why? I don't know. Other than I and we were blind. It's those statistics that Barbara was talking about. Now, for the record, there is nothing wrong with empowering young white men to be and to do all that God has created them to be and to do. We are not embarrassed by calling white men to lead. But we need to open our eyes. We need to raise and empower Black men and Hispanic women and Native Americans and anyone who God has called and gifted to lead. We're in a time when we need to see all hands on deck, and we need to see how God is gifting and calling everybody around us. And we need to use our power to empower them. And if we don't see the reality of the gifts of those unlike us, then we could miss a whole swath of people who could be empowered to change our churches and the world. Also, we live in a time when the world needs to see a place where we are coming together rather than divided. And the church needs to be that place. So, can we make a commitment to empower not only people who look like we do, not only people who are part of the majority culture, but can we make a commitment to actively look for unlikely candidates to empower and raise up into leadership? And it may be the young people. I understand that you may be in a community which has a lot more Amish than African Americans, right? But I also know that in your community, there are people who don't fit the majority. It may be migrant workers. It may be Native Americans. It may be that your key leadership is all men and you need to ask women, invite them in. Who is the Lord inviting you to reach out to be part of the conversation so that we can be at the forefront of our culture when we show it is possible to be in community together, to live life together? We're called, like Jesus, to use the power we have to empower those who have less power than us. And we're called to show the world how, with Jesus, we can do this together. Amen?